Hello, everyone. This is a special edition of NCC TV. We're going to feature a little talk about the holiday of Passover, which falls at this holiday time, early spring festival of Easter as well. And I'm very pleased to introduce again Rabbi Michael Beals from Temple Beth Shalom in Wilmington. I'm Bob Weiner, your county councilman for the 2nd District, which may not mean anything to you, but it's Brandon 100, Greenville, and Centerville. And so Rabbi and I had a wonderful interview at Hanukkah time. And so we're going to try to be more semi-serious because this is Passover. And so, Rabbi Beals, tell me, as any child would say to their grandfather or Zadie at the Passover table, why is this night different from all other nights?
Well, on this night, we only eat matzah, but on other nights, we eat bread or matzah. And it goes on for that. This is our time of celebrating our freedom, the history of our freedom from Egyptian slavery into freedom, and we recount the story year after year in order to build a sense of identity, history. Also, I think it's a call to action so that we think about how can we better people today and tomorrow. It's not about the past. I think most people know that story, but how do you take those lessons like let all who are hungry come in and eat, or we should be grateful for what we have, or being respectful of the women in our family, all of which I know we'll talk about as we go into our conversation. So it's not just a story about yesterday, but I think it's a story about today and tomorrow.
And so with our Passover Seders at our house, and I'm sure as yours as well, it's a message which is across generations into the future, and it's ecumenical.
Yeah, I think it's across culture. It's definitely interfaith in its tone. Certainly we've seen African Americans during the Civil War period. It gave them hope. I think in some ways Harriet Tubman was the Moses of their time. Thank God she just found her way onto some of our currency. It's about time. Andrew Jack, move over, make way for Harriet Tubman. She was called the Moses of her day. And then during the Civil Rights movement, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. often made references to Moses, and in fact, one of my heroes, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, and Dr. King would speak together using Moses metaphors to lift up our African American neighbors. So this story has been told many times. So even though it exists in the book of Exodus and it exists for us for over 3,300 years, it has a resonance and a uniqueness that helps other people and lifts them up as well.
And as we all know, the message is let my people go. Release them from slavery in all forms. So now let's ask about the holiday of Passover. It falls roughly around the holiday of Easter because Easter, the Last Supper was a Passover Seder, but why don't they follow each other exactly on the calendar each year?
Yes, so that is one of the 4 questions that we're not presenting this evening, but I'm happy. The more questions are asked, the better. In fact, sometimes a good question is better than a good answer, but I'll give you the best answer I can.
Good.
So the springtime holiday of Easter has to be in the spring, which is controlled by sun, solar. Whenever you hear season, think sun. So Passover also needs to be in the springtime. It's the early springtime harvest. Every Jewish holiday has 2 faces. One is historical, and one is agricultural, because Jewish people used to only live in the land of Israel. And in Israel, you need to have a spring harvest, a late spring, that would be Pentecost, or Shavuot for us, and then a fall holiday, Shavuot, or Feast of Tabernacles. So Passover is the early spring holiday. So the parsley on the Seder plate, we'll get to that, talks about that. But it also has a resonance of history. So the church fathers, no mothers at the time. The church fathers went ahead and they wanted Easter to be pinned on Passover because of what you said, the Good Friday, or God Friday is what it was called, the Last Supper. But we're on a solar calendar. And sometimes our holidays begin to float out of control. When they float out of control, the rabbis of blessed memory injected an extra month.
A leap month.
A leap month. You see, in America, all we have is a leap day now and then, but Judaism is a whole leap month. So it's called the month of Adar. We had 2 of them. It's the month before Passover. And when that extra month was inserted, making for a 13-month calendar, Passover and Easter, they were like two, it was like the express and the local on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. They flew right past each other. So Easter was at the time that you expected, and Passover is now 1 month late, but next year all will come back to normal again, and they'll be kissing cousins, and you'll see that spring break, Easter, Passover, just the way the church fathers had hoped in the first place.
Very good.
Thank
well,
you.
Thank you for answering that
That
dilemma.
was quite a
Yes,
question.
it is. So now, one of the things that we do in order to get ready for Passover is we want to make sure that we're celebrating as the ancient Israelites would have done when their bread didn't have time to rise, didn't have time to leaven, and
Matzah.
just like this matzah.
Matzah.
So we clear our house of chumetz, or leavened bread. Can you tell me how that works
I would
with the
love
family
to.
and the
I
traditions?
would love to. It's a
Yes.
very sweet story. So the idea is all the bread, this is from the biblical period, so there's a biblical injunction, no leavened products in the house, right, because the bread couldn't rise. So on the evening of right before Passover, so that would be, goodness me, that would be Thursday evening before the Friday Seder.
As we tape that, that's tonight.
It's tonight.
Right.
Oh yeah, I hope we're ready. So the children would, the lights would be darkened, and the adults in the house would have wrapped 10 little pieces of bread in the house, assuming everything else is clean. And then they would go ahead and with a candle, a spoon for scooping, and a feather, and a little bag, they would go in and look, and they would do, this probably inspired the Easter egg hunts of later, because it came from us first. So they would hunt, they would find these 10 little packages of chametz, put it in a bag, they would say a special prayer in Aramaic saying that all the bread will be like nothing, and the next morning, so the morning of the Seder, they would actually burn it on the Barbie. No shrimp on the Barbie, it's not kosher. Now, I would say that that's a very nice beginning, but a lot of our audience members are very sophisticated people, so I'll tell you that there's another idea that perhaps the matzah represents the idea of taking the bread, that puffiness, that ego, that pride, and saying, enough. The reason why we fight, the reason why there's violence, the reason why people say horrible things to each other, even, God forbid, on the campaign trail, but never in any of your elections, is because these people are so filled up with themselves. So matzah is the bread without the puff. This is not real. This is
That's a napkin, but it looks like a sheet of matzah.
It's an afikomen bag, but we'll get to that later if you
Okay.
ask me the right question.
Sure.
But the idea is that as we get ready to get the bread out of our lives, perhaps we can go and get the ego and the puffiness out of our lives as well, so that Passover becomes an emotionally, psychological, transformative holiday, not just transforming our homes, but transforming our very beings into something that's deeper and more liberating and free. And interestingly enough, what comes 6 months after Passover?
Well, we have the counting of the Omer,
Yeah.
and then
Omer, keep going.
Omer, and then we have a day of mourning in Tu
Yom
B'Shvat,
HaShoah.
Yom HaShoah.
Yeah.
But Tisha B'Av, another
Keep
day of
going.
mourning. Then we have the Jewish New Year.
Stop. So Rosh Hashanah, what happens on the first day of Rosh Hashanah after services? Do you remember? We go to a stream.
Yes, and we clear our pockets of any possessions
What
at
in
all.
particular?
Bread.
Yes! So the bread is taken from
Yes.
our pockets symbolically, thrown into the water, tashlich, and we're
Yes.
getting rid of our sins. So I think Jews are in an anti-carb mood, like twice a year. The other time we're eating carbs.
Yes.
But the idea is that the bread symbolically links, and if you will eat 6 months, we get an emotional, psychological checkup to try to make ourselves better. So Rosh Hashanah, we throw the bread out into the water, although if it's not good for the fish and the brandy wine, we could substitute.
Yes.
And then 6 months later, we're throwing the chametz out of our homes, getting rid of the ego instead. What do you think of that?
I think, lo, behold the bread of affliction.
There you go.
And bread is the staff of life.
It is that too.
So I've got some other funny-looking matzah, shmora matzah.
Shmora matzah.
What is this?
Well, this one may come from your local Chabad. Not that that's a plug, but we're
Yes.
grateful to them.
Yes.
So shmor matzah, shmor comes from the word to lishmor, to guard or watch.
Yes.
So they're very careful to make sure that when everything was put together, only 18 minutes from beginning to end for the matzah. There was no chance that this matzah could have accidentally risen because water came in contact with the dough, causing it to rise. And so this is a specially observed matzah, the kosher of kosher's matzah, and it's so good that only your friends can bring it to you.
So if we're fleeing out of Egypt and the Egyptians are chasing us and we're using actually a rock and we've got to move quickly and not let it rise, would it look like this on a rock, or would it look like that sheet?
I think it would look more like exactly what you
Okay.
have. That looks a lot more authentic. This looks kind of machine-made, and this like the real thing. And not that this isn't. Well, this is
Yes.
not. This is a bag, as I told you.
But it's
Don't
kosher
eat
for
this.
Passover.
Not the, yes, the bag is.
Yes.
So this is really very authentic, and the idea is to really use food to help get our guests into the mindset of what it was like to go free.
So we're going to have lots of symbolic
We sure
dinners.
are.
We're going to have a Seder plate.
I have a Seder plate right here. So if you will point, oh, this is for $12 at the gift shop. But if
Yes.
you're using a Seder plate at
Yes.
Congregation Beth Shalom, we'll take the label
So
off.
let me hold this for
All
you.
right, thank you.
So it has the word Pesach, Passover.
Yeah.
And so we have a shank bone.
Okay, what we'll do is for each one you point to, I'll try to
Yes.
explain it.
Yes.
In Hebrew, it's called zeroah. And zeroah is the shank bone of the blood that we don't do that today, but we dipped our over the lintels of the front of our homes. Clearly, the Egyptians in their pagan worship, not today, but the pagans of the past, probably worshipped animals as gods, including the lamb. And so imagine the chutzpah, the courage, but more, courage with a oomph, to go ahead and put the blood on the doorpost of the house when they hadn't been liberated yet. If this didn't work out, they would have been in big trouble the next day. I don't think God needed to know which homes were Hebrew homes. God is omniscient. God knows everything. I think this was for the Israelites to see, do you care enough about your freedom and your identity to put it on the line?
So what does the word Passover, or in Hebrew Poseach, come
To
from?
skip, Pesach means to skip over or pass over. So it was the angel of death that passed over these homes. So that's the first one.
Very good.
Also,
So,
by the way, it represents
yes,
the primary sacrifice that was made in temple days at those times.
when we had a temple.
Yes.
Yes. And
In fact, by the way,
yes.
I'm the rabbi of Congregation Beth Shalom, not Temple Beth Shalom, because we don't have a temple anymore. The
No.
temple was destroyed. The congregation is a way station until there's a third temple built, perhaps in our children's day,
Yes.
in the time to come.
So you were paying attention when I
I
said
listen
that.
to everything you say.
Oh my gosh, you're in trouble. Okay, charosis.
Charoset. And the fact that you
Can
put
you
the
say charoset?
charoset. Now at home, if you're not familiar with the cha, be sure you don't have friends around you when you say it, because you could offend them.
Yes.
So if you say haroset, it's close. But guttural H's are, it says Chanukah, never Chanukah. Hanukkah is okay, but Chanukah is the same letter. Charoset. If you want, it's kind of like an apple and nut chutney, and it represents the mortar that kept the bricks together that the Israelites used to build the storehouses of the ancient Egyptians with a whip of the Pharaoh. And by the way, even though you and I are used to apples and nuts, if you went to Morocco, where there are Jews, they would be using something like dates. So it might vary the recipe, but it's rather sweet, it's very pleasant, and you dip your matzah into it.
Yeah, I was in Morocco and tried the date version of
I hope you
charosis.
liked it.
I did. It was different. So now moving right along clockwise, we have lettuce, but it can also be another green as well.
Let me help you with that one.
Yes.
So it's chazeret in Hebrew, and my family never knew what to do with this one. So they would put like some extra charoset there. They just use it like, it must be another parking spot for something else. But no, it's its own thing. So it is green because, remember I told you that Passover has two faces to it. One is historical, and one is agricultural. So the agricultural is surely about the spring harvest, but wait, it's romaine lettuce. And romaine lettuce is brilliant because when you chew it at first, it tastes kind of sweet. But as you get more to the stem, the aftertaste is rather bitter. And that represents our experience that when Joseph and his family came down to Egypt, they were treated very well. And then, as you know, and as I'm sure as our audience knows, there arose a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph, beginning of Exodus. And that one treated us very poorly, and it was bitter. So in a way, the chazer, the romaine lettuce, is exactly like our experience. It started sweet, but it was deceptive, and it ended up bitter.
So continuing, we have karpas, or the parsley.
The parsley. So parsley, it represents the spring harvest idea, and you take that parsley, you dip it in the salt water, which reminds us of the tears.
Not once, but
Twice.
Twice.
To remind us of the suffering of our ancestors. Also, if people have a little bit of bad breath, when they chew that parsley, it's a natural breath freshener. It also, so that's very practical. Also, it probably represents a Greco-Roman symposium. So think about Elizabeth Taylor on that beautiful chair in Cleopatra, having intellectual experiences. That's probably what the rabbis were thinking. And so they had different types of hors d'oeuvres. And if you're at a Seder, once you serve the karpas, you could serve all sorts of salads. So nobody will ask that fifth question, which is, when do we eat?
Right. And so going to the middle, the maror, or bitter herbs.
Right. So maror is really like that bitter experience right at, it doesn't really represent what we went through because, as I said, it was deceptively sweet, but the maror is very bitter and it reminds us of how bitterness our lives were.
So we would use maybe horseradish, ground fresh. In our house, we call the white horseradish varsity and the red junior varsity.
I totally get that.
Right.
It's true.
And last, the egg.
Yes.
Yes.
So in Hebrews, beit sa, and this egg is a little deceptive because it looks completely white and completely like maybe hard boiled or just regular. But then if so, then you say, well, what's the purpose of the egg? And you'd say the circular nature of life, springtime, etc., which has hints of Easter to it, perhaps of little chickies and that. But that egg is not presented properly. It should be roasted.
Yes.
And when it's roasted, it reminds of the secondary sacrifice made at Passover called the chagiga sacrifice, from the word chag, holy day, which, by the way, our Muslim brothers would call Hajj, which is a pilgrimage holiday, because 3 times a year, Jews are supposed to go to Jerusalem to celebrate, and the first of those 3 times would be on the holy day of Passover.
Very
or
nice.
Pesach.
Well, whosoever does not explain the symbols of Passover doesn't get the mitzvah or brownie points. So
Well
I'm glad
done.
we covered that. But we have some other toys here. And,
do.
So we have, I mean, I know the one glass, the cup of Elijah, and but I'm going to ask you about this second cup because when we were growing up, we just had the one cup for Elijah, and my daughters would go to the door, and Elijah, the angel, would visit our house and take a sip, and then he would move on, but he never got drunk, even though he went to all the houses. And
It's a miracle Passover.
it is. I have to admit that when they went to the door, I would diminish the glass.
No.
Yeah, I did. When they came back, they could see that it had been diminished. But
You don't do that in
tell-
politics, though, right?
No, no, I
You're a
don't.
straight guy.
But I'm admitting it now.
All right, well, then it's all kosher. Now, before you move on,
Yeah, what is?
no, I'll get there. But let me talk
Okay.
about the Elijah cup first. So Elijah, of course, not an angel, but a prophet.
Prophet.
And he heralds the coming of the Messiah. So for our Christian friends, the Messiah is come, will come again. And for our Jewish friends like me, the Messiah is yet to come. He will come. Christians will say welcome back. Jews will say welcome. And then that argument is put to rest.
And then we'll eat.
And then we'll eat, of course.
Right.
So Elijah represents the tidings of good times. So at your table, you're telling me you started with the cup already full.
Yes.
But there are some moderns who are now starting with the cup empty. When they get to that part of the service, which is towards the end, they go ahead and pass the cup around, have everybody take a little bit of wine from their cup. Wine in Judaism represents joy or happiness. And they each take a little bit of wine and put it in their cup and pass it. The symbolism is that the Messiah isn't going to come by him or herself. It's going to come if we do our part to make it happen. So it turns people from being audience members to participants in the story of life. The story of feeding the hungry and clothing the naked and housing the homeless, that is our responsibility. So it goes back to the idea we're not just telling a story, we're trying to transform people to be better human beings. So in my idea, I like the idea of filling the wine up with your own cup of joy to make it happen. But you were asking another question. What was
Yes.
that?
So, Rabbi, why are there 2 glasses on our Seder table?
Oh, Bob, that's a good question. By the way, there's more than 4 questions. In fact, Jewish people are known by the good questions. They're like, is that a question?
Right.
Everything is a question. So
Yes.
this glass, it's a special glass. It's called the cup or kos Miriam, the cup of Miriam. Miriam the prophet, Hanavi'ah. So Moses had an extraordinary sister. And let me tell you about her. There's a midrash, a story that says when she was only 7 years old, she heard that when the decree to kill all the Israelite boys was made, her father, according to the midrash, his name was Amram, said, all of us are going to get divorces so we won't have more children, and so that way no more boys will be killed. And Miriam, at age 7, said, Abba, Dad, you're worse than Pharaoh, because Pharaoh is condemning the boys to death. But with these divorces, there'll be no boys or girls born, so you've done doubly worse. Thank God we had a good dad in Amram. He could have said, you 7-year-old, don't mouth off. No, he said, you're absolutely right. And they all got remarried again. And so that cleared the way for Moses to be born, because Miriam was born, Aaron was born, but Moses hadn't been born yet. So Moses is born, and they get the decree to kill the Israelite boys, and her mom goes ahead and takes that baby, puts it into the little ark, goes down the Nile River. Miriam, brave Miriam, goes from the comforts of home in Goshen down to not Caesar's palace, but Pharaoh's palace, which is very brave. It's like going from the worst part of town to the best part of town, where she's not welcome, but she's brave. And she sees the daughter of Pharaoh. She knows this is a Hebrew boy because of the cloth and the ark, and she raises him up as his own. Miriam says, hey, why don't I go ahead and bring that baby back to its mother to nurse? Right back home to Yocheved, but now a safe child because it's an Egyptian child. Moshe, and he was drawn from the water back to daughter of Pharaoh, Bat Paro, raised in Pharaoh's palace, and then after that has quite a life, and later on will resume his position as leader of the people. And then Miriam will stand by Moses' side, not at the banks of the Nile, but the banks of the Red Sea, singing the song of the sea, praising God for such a redemption. And then they say there was a well of Miriam that went with Miriam all throughout her life to give water to the people. All of that leads us to Miriam and water. So this is the cup of Miriam. And once you tell the story of Miriam, then you're free to talk about Moses' mom, Yocheved, and you're able to talk about Moses' brave wife, Zipporah, the first female circumciser of Mohelet. And then we don't have to talk about just Jewish women. What about Shiphrah and Puah, the Egyptian handmaidens who crossed culture and religion and xenophobia to take care of the Israelite babies and not kill them, even though Pharaoh said to do so? What about Pharaoh's own daughter who breaks her father's rules to raise this child as her own? 3 amazing Egyptian non-Jewish women, 3 amazing, well, they weren't Jewish, Hebrew women, all working together so that Moses could live and thrive and redeem our people. And when we're talking about women, why not talk about your mom, or your grandma, or your aunt, or other women in the family? And that way we learn to respect our women, to go out and praise our women, to be positive role models, and teaches our boys to be respectful, so when they grow up to be men, they'll be respectful of women as well.
Thank you for that universal message. And my question obviously gave you the opportunity to explain
I had some
universality.
thoughts on it.
You did. But we have other toys here. Okay, I'm going to move this center forward, and I'm going to say, what?
Oh, we have to
What
wind
is
it
this?
up. Well,
What
wait
is
a
it?
sec, you got to wind it up. So you should have a ball. So there's a matzah ball. That's how long it took to cross the desert. 40 years at that speed, because we're talking a lot. Okay, and then one other thing, here's another matzah ball. The hard ones are Sephardic, and those ones are chicken soup. But my mother's were Ashkenaz, light as feathers.
Right.
Like that. Now, this has nothing to do with anything. This is so that the children will be happy and engaged. And I got more things for children as well. Ask me about the bag.
Okay. What about this bag that has the word plagues on it?
Right. Well, normally, we don't want plagues. Plagues are horrible. But there were...
We don't want our enemies to suffer.
No. In fact, when we read about the plagues in the Passover Seder, during the Magid, or story Seder, we take our pinky, and every time we say a plague, we dip it in the wine, and we take it out. Don't lick your finger, although I heard you do lick your finger.
I only diminish wine. I don't lick my finger.
Loose lips.
Loose lips.
Okay, so anyway, think chef. So anyway,
Yes.
we go ahead and take 10 out, 1 for each plague, because even though wine symbolizes joy in Judaism, our joy is diminished when people suffer. Even if they're enemies, when they suffer, we suffer as well. As I said, the Seder has stories and messages that go far beyond the story itself. They say that maybe each of the plagues symbolize each of the gods of Egypt. And this was really a war about monotheism versus paganism or pantheism. And this is to show not just the Israelites, but God is a universal God. So God cared about the Egyptians.
So we're back before the Common Era.
We are.
And we're back about 3,000 years?
We are. It's about the time that the island of Santorini exploded in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, part of the Greek island chain. And some people think that when this island exploded, it caused, in a causal loop, all the things that happened during the plagues. And even if that's so, the miracle is it happened at the right time.
Yes.
That's the explanation of Rambam, Maimonides. Now, you haven't asked me what's in the bag yet.
Okay, so what's in the bag with the word plagues on it?
They're plagues, of course. Okay, makot in Hebrew. Now, I don't have them in the right order.
Okay.
So we're going to have to try to figure out what they mean. So again, this is a way of getting the kids involved, and it keeps Councilman Bob on his toes.
I'm childlike, so it
All
works
right.
for me.
So what plague do you think this might be?
The plague of death?
Darkness.
Darkness.
That's one. That's towards the end. That's the
Okay.
penultimate one. What do you think this one is?
This is the plague of the penguins.
No, silly you. That's a hockey team. No, this is supposed to be the plague of cattle disease, or Dever. I used to think it was Denver, but Denver's not. It's Dever. So that goes,
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
How am I doing so far?
Oh, you're lovely. Okay,
Great.
what is this?
This is the plague of
Miss Pig-
whales.
Miss Piggy's boyfriend.
The plague of frogs.
Yes, Spardea, frogs. Very good. That's
Thank
the
you.
second plague.
Okay.
I had to figure this one. Somebody had to help me with.
Oh, this is the
That's
plague
so
of Miss Piggy.
No, this is unfortunately this is the last one. This is the firstborn child.
Oh.
You shouldn't make such jokes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know.
I
Okay.
didn't think you did. Okay, how about this one?
Oh, this is easy. This is
This is
the
a
plague
softball one.
of strawberries.
No, it's not even tomatoes. This is blood. This is red blood. Dom, that's the first one.
Okay.
Right, and get the idea, there's another idea going on here that maybe is tit for tat. Just as the Egyptians filled the Nile with the blood of the Israelite boys, so God in turn went ahead and filled the Nile with blood as well. It's called mida keneged mida, or one good turn deserves another. It's the idea of causality. I thought that one was really gross. What do you think this one is?
Oh, this is easy. This is the suntanned girl with a yarmulke.
Oh, don't even go there. Okay, you're gonna have to edit that out. No, this is the boils. This is boils. Look, white, pustular, on pink skin. Yuck! I said yuck. Okay, good. Okay, what is this?
Oh, this is easy. This is
Every
the
time you say
famous,
this is easy, I get
the
worried.
famous snowball of Passover.
No, this is hail. So hail was really interesting because it was frozen ice, and yet when it hit the ground, it was fire. So the rabbis, they were stretched. If each plague represented something horrible the Egyptians did, what would this represent? So the rabbis said this was like the poor Israelites who had to schlep the icy cold water for the Egyptians' frigidariums, and then the boiling hot water for the solariums. That was a great answer. The problem is, this takes place in Egypt. They don't have those things back then. This is a hint that the rabbis created this whole Seder idea. It's from 2,000 years ago, from the time of Jesus. It's not from the time of the actual experiences that this happened, which was over 3,300 years ago. So this is already a modern interpretation, 2,000 years ago, of something that happened 3,300 years ago.
So is part of it didactic?
It is didactic. That's a good SAT word.
Yes.
Okay, this one is really, what do you think this is? It's a hint.
Let me see it. I have to take a look.
Okay.
It's the famous crayfish of Passover.
Yeah, I thought that too. That's treif. No, that's locust. Some locusts are kosher. This is locust. So get this: the Israelites were the original braceros to the Egyptian people. In other words, they were doing all the agriculture for the Egyptians, but the Egyptians wouldn't let the Israelites eat any of the produce themselves. And so, in order for the Egyptians to understand that, God went ahead and had the locusts destroy all the food, so the Egyptians wouldn't be able to enjoy the food either.
Of course, they're on a natural cycle. the
Well,
locusts,
that,
too.
all right, maybe, yeah. Okay.
Oh, so this is Shayna, my little Pomeranian.
It probably was based and inspired on that, but actually it's supposed to be kinim, or if you will, the creepy crawly lice that went ahead and, yes,
okay.
after the frogs decomposed. And remember, this is not all in the right order, but okay. And what is this last one? Roar.
This is Mensch, my other Pomeranian.
Oh my goodness. Oh, I thought it was one of your kitties. No, this is supposed to be wild beasts, or arov. So if you put this all together, you have these 10 plagues that represent either the deities of Egypt, or they represent the type of horrible things the Egyptians put the Israelites through, or perhaps they represent the very God's system that the Egyptians worshipped, and God came, blessed be he or she, to go ahead and say there's one God that is greater than all these gods. Of course, the most prominent God of all in the story was Pharaoh. He said he was God, and God came to say that's not true. There's only one God.
Yes.
So that's a huge story in a bag of plagues.
Wonderful. So now we have traditional foods, and so we're going to have foods made unleavened.
Yes.
So we can even have a kugel.
A kugel.
Made of the unleavened
Right.
bread.
A Jewish casserole.
Matzah, a Jewish casserole.
casserole.
So we might have a matzah, and then we might also make a sandwich of the baroer, the bitter herbs, with the chorosis.
It's called a Hillel sandwich.
A
Long
Hillel
before
sandwich.
there was McDonald's,
Right.
the Jews had created the first to-go meal, and that was that Hillel sandwich.
And it'd have 2 pieces of matzah.
That's right.
And we'll be doing that starting tomorrow night, which, depending upon which night you're watching this, Passover runs from Friday at sunset, April 22nd, through Saturday night, April 30th. So one might ask, the question is, Passover 7 nights or 8 nights? And the answer is
Yes.
yes. Please explain.
Yes. So in the Bible, Passover is a seven-day holiday. So in Israel, it's celebrated for 7 days. And because it's celebrated in Israel for 7 days in the biblical holiday, our Reform brothers and sisters and our Reconstructionist brothers and sisters, that's for another show, they celebrate for 7 days. But conservative Jews like myself, not politically, but conservative Jews like myself and Orthodox Jews celebrate for 8 days. And of course, why? Because Jewish people were living in the diaspora long before cell phones and all that, so they had to light signal fires to let them know when did the holiday begin or end. And in order to make sure they weren't worshiping on a wrong day or eating bread at the wrong time, in the diaspora, they added an extra day outside of Israel, diaspora, an extra day for each of the holy days. Israel says, well, the holidays take place in our country, so we know exactly when it is. And very practical Reform and Reconstructionist Jews say that between cell phones and telephones, and we know exactly, in Greenwich Mean Time, we know exactly when a day is, and we know these things. And conservative and Orthodox, more traditionalists. And so our Reformed brothers and sisters in Reconstruction, on Friday night next week, they'll be enjoying their bready-filled, challah-filled Shabbat, and we will be looking with envy. And then on Saturday night, we will join them at the local kosher pizza place in Teaneck.
So are we going to have Passover Seders for all our brethren, whether they're Jewish or non-Jewish, to attend? I know at Adas Kodesh, our synagogue, we have a community Seder on both Friday night, the 22nd, and Saturday night, the 23rd. Beth Shalom and Beth Emeth and Beth El and the Jewish Community Center, Chabad House, are they having community Seders as well?
Chabad is doing a community Seder as well.
Yes.
I believe Beth Emeth is doing a Seder, but not according to strict kosher Passover tradition. I am helping to fund Adas Kodeshes this year.
Very
so anybody
nice.
who's hungry will be able to go. And that's really the kind of like, all who are hungry come and eat. And they're not just saying Jewish people. So if you have the opportunity to invite our African American friends, our Latino friends, our Catholic friends, our Christian, our Muslim friends in, it's considered even a greater mitzvah to share the holiday with other people. Now, there is a slight fee, though, if you do Adas Kodesh, because that's an expensive meal to plan. But we have a special plan in case you want to go and you can't afford it.
Mitzvah.
Yes.
What is that
It
word?
means commandment, not good deed. A good deed is a subset of a commandment. Mitzvah. There's 613 in the Jewish faith, of which 10 most of everybody knows on the television. But there's another 603, which is why there's more Christians than Jews. It's easier to do this as a Christian.
And are those 613 mitzvah outlined in the 5 books of Moses?
Yes, yes plus rabbinic interpretation.
I see. So do you have another bag of tricks?
Not so much, but this is a bag that I puffed up, but it's not puffed up with matzah right now because we can't eat matzah. But
Yes.
this is a bag where we would put 3 matzot. And the 3 matzot, some people say it symbolizes the Kohanim, the Levites, and Yisrael, the 3 different types of Jews. Some people say Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform, but now that there's reconstructions, that doesn't work so well anymore.
No.
But the idea is to take the middle matzah out, break it in half.
That's called the afikomen.
Yes, and then you put the afikomen in this bag. Afikomen literally is Greek. It means after meal entertainment, which is exactly what happens. You take the bigger piece. The leader of the Seder, such as yourself, would hide it, and then we ask the children to find it. The meal can't end until that piece is found, and people who are very philosophical say perhaps that piece symbolizes the Messiah and our search for the Messiah, the idea that the world is incomplete and our job is to make it complete. Again, tikkun olam, repair of the world.
So as the father, I have to buy back that.
I'm afraid you do.
Afikomen.
Nothing comes for free. That's an important value that we teach our children at an early age. And so there's a little bartering for fun that goes on, and then normally you give the children gifts for redeeming the matzah, which actually happens after you eat the dessert. So the last taste in your mouth should be the matzah, which, if you will, is the taste of redemption, the original redemption from slavery and the future redemption of all of us in Messianic times.
And normally we would just have maybe 1 glass of wine, but on Passover, why are we commanded to, by the Bible to have 4 glasses of wine?
Oh, that's a wonderful, slightly complicated answer.
Yes.
4 glasses of wine to symbolize the 4 different verbs in the book of Exodus about how God took us out of Egypt with an outstretched arm, and he would bring us, and every verb that talks about redemption represents a different cup of wine. Now, of course, the rabbis argued, as rabbis sometimes do. It's a sign of intellectual love for the tradition. And 1 sentence later in the book of Exodus, there's a 5th verb, I will bring you into the land. And the rabbis argue, well, perhaps we should have a 5th cup of wine then. But the more practical rabbi said, by the time that 5th cup of wine, you'd be so schnockered that whatever seriousness you had left in the Seder went out the window or out the door when you voted in to bring in Elijah. So they said only 4 glasses. They also said bringing you into the land of Egypt is a different, into the land of Israel, is a different liberation than out of Egypt. One is out and one is in. They argued, and finally the rabbi said, Teku. And Teku is an abbreviation that it will be solved in the time of Elijah the prophet. So one of the reasons why that 5th cup is there, to say that Elijah will come and settle all these different arguments. 4 glasses of wine, 4 sons or children, 4 questions. The number 4 is very important.
So here we are celebrating the Passover Seder with our friends and family. There's 8 nights of Passover.
You see, you've been drinking. That's why we only do 4 cups of wine.
But we only have Passover Seder on the first 2 nights.
Right, so they're actually 2 separate holidays. One is Chag Pesach, which is the holiday of the Paschal Lamb, of the sacrifice. And then you have another holiday called Chag Matzot, the festival of matzah. And they're actually 2 separate holy days. Although we eat matzah for all of them, you don't keep having a Seder night after night after night. Although some people will have alternative Seders, women's Seders, liberation Seders. I once went to a Seder for people who had addictions. And they had an addiction Seder to help them, because the word Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim. And Mitzrayim means a narrow, constrained place. Because if you think about Egypt in terms of population placement, really they only live on both sides of the Nile River by the water source. So it is a narrow place. But for Israelites, of course, slavery was so narrow. So the point of Egypt is to come out of Egypt into your open place, the Bamidbar, the desert, the wilderness, where all things are possible. So for somebody who's suffering from an addiction, it's a wonderful metaphor about trying to come out of their own separate Mitzrayim, their own Egypts, and into a place of freedom. So as we said earlier, this Seder resonates. Seder in different Haggadahs. This is the Beals family Haggadah. This is the one.
Haggadah. So we have a Seder, which means order, the order of the service, which is delineated in this Haggadah, or the special Passover prayer book, and it goes through the different steps of the Seder. How many steps of the Seder
Well,
are there?
for people in addiction, there's a 12-step program.
Yes.
So for Jewish people, it's a 14-step program called the Seder. And this 14-step program is double 7, 7 being a powerful number in Judaism, 7 days of the week, 7 days of creation, 7 steps down to the mikveh, the ritual bath, 14 steps, double 7, up to the Holy Temple with a Levitical choir singing on each steps. So 14 steps to go from slavery to freedom. And I actually have these 14 steps here, and some people sing it something like this. Kadesh Orchat, Karpas Yachat, Magid Otsa, Motzi Matzah, Maror Korech, Shulchan Orech, Tzafum Barech, Halal Nirtzah. And that stood for the blessing over the wine, hand washing, the dipping of vegetables in salt water, the breaking of the middle matzah, the telling of the story, which takes the longest, hand washing, eating matzah, eating bitter herbs, eating the matzah and the maror sandwich together, the meal that also takes a bit of time, especially in my home, tzafun, the finding and eating of the afikomen, barech, the blessing after the meal, the grace after, which takes a really long time. Most of the pages are actually in the blessing after the meal. Then the reciting of Psalms, and then Nirtzah is the conclusion. 14 steps from slavery to freedom.
Mm-hmm. So we have the Passover Seder, and we have the opportunity to bond with our friends and our family. And of course, not only with food and with wine and with matzah, which we use instead of bread, but music is also a very important
Love
part
the
of our
music.
holiday. So this is our segue into opportunity to just sing a few Passover songs.
We'll do one. How just one? Good
Did
one.
you bring your guitar?
I brought my guitar.
Wonderful. Okay, let's just do one.
All right. So let me explain it before we do it.
Okay.
All right. So there are children in Israel, and they're playing on the playground, and one child is annoying another, and the boy turns to the girl and says, "Die." And if you're an American listening, you say, "Well, that's a little extreme. Maybe stop that, or it bothers me, or hurting my feelings, or I'll have to see a therapist," or something like that. Mental health, by the way, is ignored at our para. I wish we took it more seriously. But in this particular case, die doesn't mean the end of life. Die in Hebrew means enough, enough, Yiddish genucht. Dayenu means it would be enough for us. This is the song of gratitude. So it would have been enough for us. The one that really gets me is it would have been enough if God had brought the Israelites into the desert at Mount Sinai and not given us the Torah, the Bible. Dayenu, it would have been enough for us. Now, I think that's meshuggah, that's crazy. Yeah, schlep into the desert, it's hot, it's miserable, and I come to Mount Sinai and no Torah, what was that all about? But I learned in rabbinical school, the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, where I'm happy to have been ordained, that it turns out that we Jews never agreed to anything. Do we this day? We don't, do we? Do we?
I disagree.
There you go. So they say 3 Jews, 5 opinions. But at Mount Sinai, the one time we spoke with a unified voice, everything that God will tell us, we will do it. So that was so wonderful. Such a wonderful
So
time.
how many verses are there to Dayan?
Multiple, but we'll do only 3.
Only 3.
And let me explain which ones we'll do. If God had only taken us out of Egypt, it would have been enough. If God had given us the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, it would have been enough. If God had only given us the Shabbat, the Sabbath, it would have been enough. But there's so many more. And I suggest around your Seder, or even if you're not Jewish, around your dinner table, perhaps you could talk about your Dayanis. What are you grateful for at the table? So with that, let's sing. Key of C.
Okay.
Torah, Shabbat, Nataranu, et Shabbat, Dayenu. One last time. Dayenu, 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 Dayenu.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Happy Passover.
holiday.
Happy holiday. Happy Easter. And for those of us that are watching during Passover, which will be April 21st through April 30th, we're filming this the day before, April 20th. To you and your family and friends, a happy holiday season.